Conversations. I'm your host, Marla Goldberg. This podcast has been created with you in mind to acquaint you with some of the most incredible metaphysicians and spiritual leaders from around the globe who have helped others change their lives. In this interactive hour, you will be offered insights and techniques to help you make a difference in your life. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite listening platform. And here we go, on to the show. Hello. Welcome to Guided Spirit Conversations. I'm your host, Marla Goldberg. And today we have another one of these shows that I don't want you to miss because this one's going to be amazing. We've got Betty J. Kovacs, Ph.D., and Betty is a recognized expert. She shares her knowledge and passion through her books, speaking, teaching, and media interviews throughout the United States and Europe. She speaks to national and global audiences through webinars, keynote presentations, and media interviews. She received her PhD from the University of California, Irvine, in comparative literature and theory of symbolic mythic language. She taught literature, writing, symbolic mythic language for 25 years. She served many years as chair and program chair on the board of directors of the Young Society of Claremont in California, and sits in the academic advisory board of Forever Family Foundation. Within a 3-year period, she experienced the deaths of her mother, son, and her husband in separate automobile accidents. While she studied shamanism before her son's accident, she and her husband actually experienced their son's consciousness after his death for an extended period of time. These experiences completely changed their lives. After her retirement, Betty began an intensified period of research into our ancestors' experience of a vaster consciousness, cosmic Christ consciousness, which she relates in her new book, Merchants of Light, the consciousness that is changing the world, winner of the Nautilus Silver Book Award and the Scientific and Medical Network 2019 Book Prize. So welcome, Betty. That is quite CV.
Thank you.
And so let's start at the beginning. I mean, I know you were very much mainstream at the beginning of your career, but at a certain point, there was a shift. And then you started going down more of a spiritual path. How did that happen? Was it based on your son?
No, I think all my life, I was looking for something. I felt like, surely this isn't it. Is this it? And
There is.
yes, and I went to church, and I couldn't find it there. Although there was a sense of something more, it didn't happen for me. But I was always looking, and so that's the reason I went to university. Probably is because I wanted to find out what's it all about. And my brother and I, when we were young, we would always talk about these things. We were out in the country, we played, and we would play all kinds of games, or what if there wasn't a world, try to figure it all out. And my brother went up to my mother one morning and he said, you know what, when I get to heaven, I'm just going to walk right up to God and I'm just going to ask, how come all this anyhow? And I always thought that was pretty much my question. And I think many people's question, what's it all about? Are we going to just live this life and not know? So, but at the university, of course, I was confronted with the scientific worldview, which was that there's nothing. There's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's nothing but matter, and you don't matter. And when you're dead, and that's it. And then, of course, there was the religion story, but I tried that over and over, and I couldn't get anywhere with that. So that was a conundrum of what is it all about anyway? And so I was always looking for that, studying that. I studied religion, I studied mythology, I studied symbolism. And so that set me on my path, I would say.
So it was an early time you started becoming a searcher.
Yes. Very.
Yeah, so important because, wow, it's interesting because so many people really start stepping into their spiritual path when they're in their 40s or 50s. Something is a catalyst that drives them. So when you, especially you're of a retired age, it's mentioned it in the CV. When you're older, to start that young is not as normal as it is today. So it's an unusual path to start exploring way back when.
Yes, and I was always looking for it, and I didn't know what to study, so I decided I would major in literature, because at least in literature, I could look at all facets of the character and how the character felt. What other subject, unless it was psychology, did you deal with the human being and what they felt and what they longed for? So that was possible, but gradually, uh, I was studying archaeology and ancient history and so-called prehistory and the symbolism and what were they thinking and so on. So it was very much involved in that. I went to South America to study with shamans for a while, and but then when our son was killed, uh,
I'm
that
so sorry to hear that.
yeah, he was 20. Yes, it was. But and he was very interested in this kind of thing too. But it was then that I really started having my own inner experience. Before that, I read other people's experiences. I studied so much, but I knew I needed to experience it before I could know it. And when he died, then it was about a week after his memorial, both Istvan, my husband, and I began to experience his consciousness, and that changed everything. Then I knew I didn't have to believe anything.
When you say experiences consciousness, can you delve a little deeper into what you experienced?
Yes, we would just experience his presence. Now, my husband actually could, it was a visionary state. He saw him and they talked and they went various places together. And his girlfriend also had similar experiences. And I had the experiences, but I didn't see his image, but I knew exactly that he was present. I knew where in the room. It was like there was an energy field where I knew that's where he was. And we talked about all kinds of things. I mean, it was internal, but it just was incredible feeling of knowing that's his presence. And that's what he said. I wanted you two to remember. It wasn't like we didn't know it. It's like in this culture, we'd forgotten it. And he said, I wanted you to remember I'm alive. I'm still working. I'm still creating. And he also wanted us to know what the earth would be going through in the next decades. That seemed to be part of his purpose. So it was just
Interesting.
like being with him and talking with him, except at the same time, it was that incredibly beautiful feeling of love and a higher level of being.
And was he a bit of an environmentalist when he was on the planet in his body?
He was concerned about it. He knew about it. But when his first experience with his girlfriend, Jenny, was that he took her around to look at the earth. And he said, the earth is your body too. And he wanted her to understand that, take care of her body, and also realize that the earth was her body too. And she said, she was 19. She said, I'd never even thought about those things before. So,
And most people don't. Most people are not aware about the physicality and how that does relate to the planetary circumstances. It's, it's
it's right. She said that she saw, he took her outside the planet and she saw all of this kind of muck around the planet. And he said that's partly physical pollution, but Jenny, it's spiritual pollution in the sense that this disbelief, this negativity that there's nothing there. It creates some kind of a barrier between the physical and spiritual realm, so that communication is harder because those belief systems create a kind of pollution.
I never thought of it that way, but that's a fascinating visual to see and to feel and to recognize so that one can, because you have to recognize it before you can make steps to make changes about it.
Yes, that's true. To really, and seeing it helps.
Right. Well, it's like seeing the smog in LA. Okay. You see the smog in LA, and I'm sure during COVID, the smog dissipated a great deal because so few people were on the road. And it was like, this is the LA of old days. And
Yeah.
now I have a feeling it's probably pretty big, close to the way it was,
Mhm.
which
Yes.
is all heartbreaking. So I want to talk about the dominant negative story that we've been telling ourselves about Western culture. What is it?
Well, it's, there's so many people who feel worthless, who can't find any meaning in their lives. And when we look back to, let's say, the history of Judaism, and I'm grateful to the scholar Margaret Barker uh, for discovering that the first temple Judaism was a shaman mystic tradition. And it's interesting because since I've written the book, I've heard from uh, a couple of Jewish people who have discovered that and have told me about people who've written about it, that it was shamanistic. They realized that by just going back and looking at some of the artifacts and some of the traditions. But Margaret Barker did it very thoroughly. And they very much honored the feminine. I mean, there were feminine images all over Israel, everywhere. And during the first temple tradition, she was wisdom. It was that it was nature, the heart, the soul,
Mm.
life giving. She was life itself. That soul in every human being, male or female. But in 621 BCE, the Deuteronomists, we don't know who they were, a group of priests, they destroyed that tradition. And they destroyed the feminine. They destroyed her images, and they burnt down her beautiful groves of trees, because the tree was always symbolic of life and the feminine, of soul. We're rooted in the earth and we reach to the heavens. We are the mediators between the depth of the earth and the vastness of the cosmos. And that was destroyed. But here is the story. We all know this story, whether we believed it or not, uh, the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, in which there are many trees, and God says, you may eat of all of these trees, but this particular one of knowledge of good and evil, you may not eat of that. Well, of course, as parents, we all know if you say that, that's exactly where we're going to go. But they did eat of it. And then they were punished. I mean, this, as a kid, I thought this was so strange. Why would God not want us to know, to have knowledge of the polarities of what we might label good and evil or whatever? And why would God punish the woman who gave it to Adam, that in her childbirth she would suffer, and Adam would suffer in trying to till the land? And of course, the serpent would be condemned. Nature itself was condemned. And we, the human being, was so worthless and sinful that we were thrown out of the garden. We did not belong in the garden. We were sinners, not worthy of being in the garden. This is a horrible story, absolutely horrible story. And whether we believed it or not, it was that we are sinners, we are flawed. We can only, and then when the Roman Church picked it up, they emphasized that flawed aspect, and you can only be made whole by something outside of you. And so the story was for centuries that we were not in and of ourselves God's creatures, but they were flawed and sinful. And original sin, the church took it, that everyone born is sinful. We carry this. Well, this is just the most wretched story. And it is an inversion of the true story. The true story is that the tree is life itself, soul, spirit, life, rooted in the earth and reaching to the heavens. And it is the feminine. It is the goddess, the divine wisdom. And in Sumerian seals, and I have one of them in my book, there is the tree just weighted down with fruit, and there's the god who's pointing to it like, take it. And the goddess was there with the great serpent behind her. It's like, here, it is for you. There was never a a forbidden fruit. It was always, if you are ready for this fruit, it is here for you. And later in Egyptian symbolism, the tree, we can see the trunk of the tree is actually the goddess, and she is handing the fruit to people, and she's giving sometimes a glass of liquid essence. And of course, the serpent is the Kundalini spiritual energy rising, and she is the feminine, and that is a natural thing for us as human beings to take of the fruit when we're ready, and that we are totally worthy of it, and no one is kicked out of the garden. So this particular story by the Deuteronomists, carried on by the Roman Church, did us in, because we grew up, whether we believe those stories or not, the culture made us feel unworthy. And today, what do we have but a group of people who would like to dominate the globe, and they want us to know we're flawed, and that they will now pick up evolution, and they can hack us, do whatever they need to with nanomedicine and AI and so on. They will take care of our evolution from here on out. That is a result of that story of 621 BCE.
Wow. Which is amazing. And what's interesting is back then they wanted to rule, for no better way of saying it, in fear, making you feel fearful and less than. And, if you don't follow our doctrine, darkness in whatever form is going to come upon you.
Yeah. And
when people believe it, where thoughts go, energy flows. So these people are saying it and they go, must be true. And then it comes to them. And then it's like self-fulfilled prophecies.
exactly, because fear is always the way to control, because when we're fearful, the energy shoots back to the older consciousness of defense, take care. And really, consciousness should flow up the spinal cord through the various brain components and the heart and circle again. If you make someone afraid, then in that moment they protect themselves. But what we're experiencing, and what was experienced long ago, was stay in a fearful state. And that way, the energy cannot flow through the heart. You cannot evolve because you're in fear. And we always see when anyone wants to have control over us, they tell us things that make us fearful. And today, that's easy to do because the people who would love to control us own all of the media, except these wonderful podcasts and independent things. So we have to always be careful, because the illness of not going inward and achieving that inner state of consciousness, the illness is always, it's projected outward. If I don't have control within, perhaps I can control you, and maybe the globe.
That's a really great point, about control. And yeah, people do use fear and they use dominance to control, like what Russia's doing right now to the Ukraine. Fearful for them to be in their apartments. So they burn, they blow up an apartment building so that it just reinforces the fear factor of they're not going to be safe anywhere. Just as an example. It's interesting how the whole thing goes. Do you have any insight into how one overcomes people's projections of fear on them?
First of all, I think that we need to know that fear is a tool of control. We need to know that. And then if we are receiving messages that are given by someone who is actually controlling our lives, if this message that we're receiving is changing the way we live and controlling what we're thinking about ourselves, we need to look into it. Always need to look into it. If fear is a part of it, then we need to know what's going on. Is this a true story? We've been told false stories for centuries about who we are and what's going on. So is the official narrative that we're getting today, is this a true story, or does it have a force behind it? So I think we need to follow the fear and to the source of producing the fear. It's so very important, I think, because we can always be controlled if we're not aware that, whoops, if I'm being put in a state of fear, I'd better follow that path to the source of it. And is it really what I'm being told? I think that's so important. We have to know first what's going on, because it's an old tactic. And, Jesus in the Nag Hammadi text, and Jesus, by the way, again, thanks to Margaret Barker and others, Jesus was a rebirth of the first temple tradition, the shaman mystic tradition. Jesus taught a hidden tradition, and that tradition was the shamanic mystic tradition of going inward and finding this source within ourselves. But of course, that was certainly, it had to be hidden. And then the church really denied it altogether. So he said in Nag Hammadi text, I did not come to die for you. I did not come to save you. I came to remind you of who you are, because that had been taken away from us.
Do you feel that the Roman Catholic Church developed like a materialistic science to help to dissuade people from being in their power?
It was a funny thing. In my book, I show how out of our origins, we were shaman mystics, and how that was suppressed again and again by those who wanted power over us, not to allow us to have power within us. And so we saw the Deuteronomist and then the Roman Church. And the Roman Church saw that this was still active because there had been a powerful renaissance of this ancient shamanistic culture in the High Middle Ages. And I mean, incredible. And I talk about that in the book. It's an incredible rebirth of the hidden tradition that Jesus taught right in the cathedrals. These cathedrals were built by whom? Many of them. And they had the labyrinth within them, which is the symbol of the journey to the center of self. And they also seem to be of the same structure as a Virgo, the stars, which was of the feminine. And so it's just an incredible, but that was a rebirth of it. It still was trying to come through during the Italian Renaissance. And then during 1600 to 1620, there were mystics from all over Europe, alchemists, Kabbalists, Christian mystics, and Hermetists. They were all kind of centering around the old Bohemia, where the ruler at that time, although Catholic, he allowed them to work together because he had interest. Well, when the church realized what was going on, it wiped it out and destroyed the papers, destroyed the research. And the 30 Years' War between the Protestants, Catholics. After that, in 1660, then there was the Society for the Study of Science. And at that point, everybody knew the church would not allow science to study anything other than material world. And it's kind of funny that they would wipe out the spiritual part, but what they wanted to do is wipe out the power of the mystic scientists, because in old Bohemia, they were scientists and they were mystics. But that gave too much independence to the individual. So the church didn't want that. He didn't want scientists who were also mystics. So later, when they really started having a society for the study of science legitimately, the church was behind the censorship of studying anything but matter. And it wasn't really, it's kind of ironic that it was the church that really brought us to a place in which we had no belief whatsoever in a spiritual way of life. But now with quantum physics in the last century, we know that we've come full force and we've brought back that multidimensional spiritual dimension through quantum physics. But it's taken a long time, and a lot of harm has been done to all of us as a result of it.
So I agree with that. It's like the new version of the Dark Ages is what seems to the church seem to have done from what you're sharing.
Yes, and then yet we thought of ourselves, we're the most highly developed people in the world, we're scientific, and even the French Enlightenment, which came at the same time, late 1600s, 1700s, there was like everything that came before was nonsense. And it was only the intellectual left brain. So that philosophy working with there's nothing but matter practically destroyed us. And only now are we trying to find our way to wholeness and
Well,
bring that back.
do you see the similarity? This is what's coming to my mind's eye as I'm seeing us trying to come to wholeness and finding who we truly are. And on the other side of that, coming to synchronicity with the planet, with the earth, and the processes of what's going on. Before we came on here, we were talking about smog and, in LA, and, or we were talking about your son and the trip that he took his girlfriend on, the visitation, where she showed the muck around the world. And I feel that this is today, there's so many more people stepping into the light, stepping into a light practice, to sort of break through that layer of muck, is I don't know what other better word to
Right.
call it.
Yes, I agree. I think that, in the earlier shaman mystic cultures, there was this deep respect for nature. And nothing was more important than understanding her laws, because the same laws functioned in all life. And it was, if you live within those laws, you can be truly creative. And it was such a deep and profound respect for the earth. And also, even in the megalithic period, there was where they built these huge structures. We now know they're all over the world, that understood the equinoxes and the solstices and the precession. And then these structures were both observatories and temples because there was no separation for them. It's all whole, it's all spiritual. And the individual was seen as the mediator of the energies of the earth with the cosmos. And so it was this respect of living within those laws and harmoniously. And then by the late 1600s, it was all out disrespect. Let's put nature on the rack and torture her secrets out of her. This is not exactly how you have a relationship, So this was that was the essence of it. And we've destroyed her. And by destroying her, we're destroying ourselves. And I think many people are realizing that now.
Well, we're getting so close to no the what is the point of no return? I mean, right now we have a little crack of a window where we're able to turn things around. And I have to admit, not to get political, but hearing about the new policy that was passed over the weekend, for the environment has given some hope that maybe they will start protecting Mother Nature and in all aspects again, opposed to draining it of its resources.
Yes, and we have to look at that bill clearly to see what was given away in order to get that and what those costs will be, because not enough of us have really awakened to the fact that this is our body. It's our body, everybody's. But I do agree with you that more people are becoming aware of that and realizing we don't have much time, and we will suffer the consequences of it.
It's true. I mean, we could very easily, this planet could implode. Fracking drives me crazy. I'm just going to put that out there. The fact that they're taking resources that keep the earth solid and whole for greed and consumption is very difficult for me to swallow because, if you're taking out oil, which has a consistency of X, and you're filling it back up with water, which has a totally different consistency, it's not going to be able to do the same to hold the pieces of the world together.
Mm-hmm.
And we all will be affected by this, not just one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the poor people. The wealthy people are not going to get away with, you
Yeah,
know,
the poor will suffer first, but it will come to everybody. Yeah, yeah. It's if only if only we could think of the earth as a living spirit that's conscious, that everything has consciousness in varying degrees. And certainly we learned that from quantum physics. if we could understand that and realize that we're all in different vibratory energies and that we need to live together harmoniously and allow each of those energies to function in its own way, but if there could be a relationship, a love relationship of understanding that whatever we do, we're working with that consciousness or against it. When sometimes we can get so discouraged by what's going on in the world and just think there's no chance. But I think we forget in those cases that the cosmos is conscious and it is working with this planet and the people on it. And I think that's one thing we receive through the merchants of light is that absolutely. And that not only that, by bringing this, that because of the people on the earth want this, they have been able to draw this light to the planet and anchor it in the earth so that higher frequency beings can be born on the planet and that we can work in a way that will be more fulfilling, that our work will be more successful. And when we start to really realize the planets, the earth, the cosmos is working with us, that we have to have confidence in our work and not think, oh, well, what little thing can I do? It's
Right.
like whatever we do affects the planet.
Well, it's like back in the day, saving a penny. Well, if you save 1 penny, you have a penny. But if you save 5 pennies, you have a nickel. If you save 10 pennies, you have a dime. So people, instead of being defeatist, saying, what is my contribution going to do? Well, if you lay up off the footprint, your contribution does a lot. Like,
Right.
I think it was when Kobe Bryant's helicopter went down, to think that he took his helicopter with a bunch of people to go to a basketball practice or basketball game for his daughter that might have only been a 1 hour drive, right? But the convenience. But what that every time somebody does something like that, the footprint from the fuel and what it does to the planet. I wish people had more of a concept and say, I'd rather drive than do this. It takes a little bit longer, but.
Yeah, that there are ways, for instance, at Davos with the World Economic Forum, whose message is they're going to save the world, but we'll have to do what they want us to do. As they say, you'll own nothing and be happy. But they're going to save the planet. And then these people who are working on this, hundreds of them all fly their private jets to Davos. Are you really concerned about the planet here? I mean, I think it's when we get mixed stories like this, we have to start paying attention.
Well, I agree, and start doing your research. You had mentioned something earlier in our conversation about, things coming out and people just going along with it. Research it.
Exactly.
Research who you want to be a part of our political family. Who's going to, are they helping us? Are they helping themselves?
That's it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I'm just agreeing with you.
Yeah, it's just something that is that people have to start becoming independent critical thinkers on their own rather than being followers, or just because someone's charismatic or says what they want you to hear, is that really what they stand for? And are they looking out for your best interest or their own?
Exactly. And we can't just assume we can go to Google and internet to get our information. We cannot. We have to know who it is who is speaking and what they are doing in the world. What are they doing in the world? And
For the world.
and for the world, yes, we have to be careful. We can't get our information from the regular sources because it is owned by those who are creating the official narrative. And so we don't go to the criminals to get the crime story, so to speak.
But they would be so colorful.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to change directions a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about merchants of light, the consciousness that is changing the world. First, let's talk about the difference between cosmic and Christ consciousness, so people
I
have an idea.
I think that either they are used in the same way, Christ consciousness or cosmic consciousness. And in the book, I tell about the person who first of all called it cosmic consciousness was Richard Maurice Bach, who was a medical doctor from Canada. In fact, he was Walt Whitman's doctor, but he had spent the evening with really good friends. They were talking about poetry and the various poets and reading it and really focusing in that way. He got in the carriage, it was in the late 1800s, to go back home, and suddenly he thought the city in front of him was on fire. It was just total light. And then he realized, no, it's in me. And he said that that experience lasted, he said, I don't even know how long, but it completely changed my life, because in those moments, however long they were, I knew that everything is alive, everything is conscious, and that the universe, the heart of the universe is love, and that there is no death, and that we will all eventually achieve this type of consciousness. And he later thought, well, I'm just going to look to see in history how many people achieved that. And so he wrote a book about these people called Cosmic Consciousness. And it's also what, though, Christians have called Christ consciousness. And what I think Christ meant, Jesus meant about the Christ. And in the Nag Hammadi text, he says that it's pretty clear that you are not to follow the Christ, but to become the Christ, to achieve Christ consciousness. And it was such a sad thing that the church would make him God, us not, and the only way for us was to worship something outside ourselves. No, that was not Jesus's message, which we know from these texts that were found in Upper Egypt right after World War II. But the church had made it clear to the monks there that if they didn't get rid of those texts, the church would. And wasn't it wonderful that we found them right after the war, when that's what we needed, to go within to find who we are? The Dead Sea Scrolls were also found after World War II. Here were Jewish mystics who did not go along with the Second Temple. No, they went along with the first, but they had to leave in order to do it. So here we have a whole different way of thinking. And I love how the Jesus of the Nag Hammadi text says, if you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring it forth, it will destroy you. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that we have been programmed, brainwashed for centuries that there is nothing and nothing within. And if there's any type of thing that's got outside you, and you're certainly unworthy, and you have to rely on that to make you worthy. No. So we've had all of this brainwashing. And it's hard for us, even when we experience it, it's hard for us. I went through that, is that I'd looked for it all my life. And when I was actually in the experience, I knew. But when I came back, my left brain had been brainwashed without me accepting it. And it was immediately start questioning everything. But this is the effects of brainwashing. I think we see that today. We get a particular narrative over and over and over, so that even when we see the evidence, we can't accept it easily. This is so dangerous.
It's so dangerous. And it's funny, I had this conversation with my husband about it was political in nature, but no, it was the news. It was the news, and how the same news gets repeated over and over and over again. Every 30 minutes or 15 minutes, you get the same headlines and the same stories. And that's why they say stop listening to the news, because, if people repeat it enough, you start to say, oh, is there some truth to it?
You
Oh, is
believe
there
it,
this? Yeah.
even if you don't consciously accept it. It's there. And when we realize, when we look at now how it's been completely bought up, that they're repeating the same messages, you see them at the same time. And so we need to really, it's so important. We cannot bring forth what is within us if we're brainwashed. We have to cut through that and allow what is within, first of all, to be honored and respected and trusted,
Yeah.
that yes, there is within us what we need to heal us. It's just hard to believe that when we've had centuries of otherwise stories.
And here's the thing, how many stories have you heard about people who have had intuitive hits, as I'll put it, and they ignore them? I mean, their insides, their guides, they are telling them something's not right, right? The eternal alarm is going, wow, wow, and they're just ignoring it
Yeah, yeah.
and not trusting who they are and what they're getting.
And that is so sad. There's also still uh, churches, especially certain aspects of the Protestant church, that, and I have seen this in two students that I had, that they were just so looking for meaning. And one was in the Catholic Church, as a matter of fact, one was in the Protestant church, so I have changed that. And in both cases, they had had visionary experiences, which really was nurturing them. And the church in both cases taught them, especially in the Protestant, that is of the devil. Do not believe that. And in one person who had really been helped by the visionary experiences that he had had, was finally convinced that they were of the devil. And now that is that is one of the worst things that any organization can do, is to destroy the inner experience, that our connection with spirit, with the divine. And those two people actually believed that whatever they'd experienced before was of the devil. Now, that is so sad to me, because that is destroying the life spirit within the person, the soul.
And not just in this lifetime. In future incarnations, it will be affected, and they will have to do so much more work
Mm,
to undo this web that they're making now.
mm. And I'm wondering how you think about this. It seems to me that so many of us who are born now are working on that. We're becoming aware of the false political stories. I mean, that was a political story from the Deuteronomist as well as from the Roman Church, because it was to control. It was the Roman Church need to control that inhibited and restricted scientific investigation. And now we see that there are all kinds of stories to keep us from being free to do what we need to do. But I think that when I look at the 20th century and all of these scholars working independently, discovered independent shaman mystic cultures, so that we know this is who we were. And it was gradually destroyed, but it went underground. So we have alchemy underground, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and they all include the feminine that was destroyed on the surface. Mystic Christianity, yes, the feminine exists underground in mystic Christianity. So all of this is coming in the 20th century and now the 21st, that there's so many people who are waking up and
Mhm.
saying, wait a minute, and so we're working on seeing these stories are not our stories. These are not our stories. Here are the true stories that have existed for millennia.
What you said, I truly believe, and again, it goes back to power and control. What happened when Moses went to get the tablets? Right, he was gone so long. Somebody started revving everybody up to go back to having a hedonistic party. Melting the goal, making idols, partying, having orgies, because it's like they just lost trust, they lost faith that what Moses said he was doing, he was actually doing, and they all felt, I'm forgotten about.
Yeah.
And it feels the same way today, and that
Yeah.
a lot of these, well, not just religious organizations but political, they all are, it's like they're playing out of the same handbook.
Exactly. Exactly. It's take away that which is within you. And when you can't bring that forth, we can control you. And
Exactly.
that's an illness. This, I think that right now we are waking up, but we're also confronted with one of the most profound darkness is that we have confronted, because all of the repercussions of this suppression and repression and denial and lack of knowledge of the universe, all of this is now sort of ballooned, you might say, in those who need to control the world, need to own everything. And that is an illness which results as a result of not knowing that which is within us. So here are our brothers and sisters in our species who these are the children who've been affected by these horrible, horrible, horrible stories. And we're waking up, some of us on this side, but then we begin to realize here's what we're up against. And we want to heal not only ourselves, but we want to heal this need to control the globe. This is a pathology that is a direct result of not bringing forth what is within them. Because there's nothing there. There's the belief there's nothing there.
I so believe with you. And so where I take it to another level where I say that people who have this need, this control, this desire to, you take the masculine to the nth degree and get everything, it really has at the bottom of it a lack of self-worth, self-love. Because if they can't love themselves, how can they love another? How can they love the planet? How can they love an animal? Do they really?
You're absolutely right. Because when we go within and we discover that the cosmos within us, then we begin to love who we are. And
Yes.
we can't really love others if we don't have anything to give, if we're worthless. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. And they are actually saying, the human being is flawed and we need to fix this. Well, it's flawed because we haven't gone within to discover and to really realize, wait a minute, why am I not worthy of love?
Exactly. It's so true. I need to take a little bit of a detour because it's charity shout out time. And your charity is the Forever Family Foundation, which is foreverfamilyfoundation.org, which will be in the blog, all your links to where to get a hold of you, where to find your book. But talk to me about the organization and why it's so important to you.
Well, it's an absolutely incredible organization. Kim and I, Kim, who's chair of the Kovacs Center, we discovered it right after my book was published, Miracle of Death. There's Nothing But Life. And we realized we started learning things about them. And Kim was in touch with Fran, who was one of the founders, she and her husband. And we discovered, in fact, I was invited by them to New York to speak at one of their conventions on surviving death, the survival of consciousness. And we got to know them quite well. We became very, very good friends with them. And we realized that their daughter, who was about 14 when she was killed in a car accident, the brother was with her. He was almost killed, but he survived. And, Bob Ginsberg said, I didn't think anything about, there was nothing going on. But when she died, they both started investigating and they started having all kinds of experiences with their daughter, which was just shocking to Bob, especially because he didn't believe anything. Now, Fran was very intuitive because on the morning that the accident happened that evening, she woke up and she said, "Oh, Bob, something terrible is going to happen today. Something terrible." So they kept in touch with the kids all day. And by evening, they kind of forgotten about it and they met the kids for dinner, and two of them took the smaller car home, and that's when the accident happened. So they really started having experiences. And so they decided, sort of like I did, I was going to study this. They then formed an organization to really explore, does consciousness survive? And they now knew it did. But they also were one of the first organizations that had national conventions of bringing scientists together and people who had experienced the loved ones after death. It was really wonderful. And they've just continued now with all kinds of things. They have the workshop on surviving death. I think they have one in Florida, one in Connecticut, and one in California. And the people who go there are just absolutely changed. I spoke at the one also, not only in New York, but in Connecticut. And I saw people go there who were just stricken. And by the end of it, they were different. And of course, there are mediums there, and rather remarkable mediums who, in many cases, were in touch with the ones who had just died. And when that happened, that was life-saving. Bob has just written a book on mediums, the good, bad, and the indifferent.
I
And
love that name.
well, I'm not sure that's the title. I can't remember exactly. But Robert Ginsburg, it's on Forever Family Foundation website, the book he has written. But it's a great book because it is about those who are good and bad and those who are not. But it's very, very good. All of the questions you would have before you go to a medium. But people were really changed by that. And these workshops have been wonderful. And there's now a film, Surviving Death. It's a Netflix
Yes.
film. Yeah. And there's a section in there about Forever Family Foundation. And many of those people know each other and work together. So it's really an organization that changes people's lives. Kim and I also, we're part of a radio show once a month in which people simply call in and tell the experiences they've had. There's someone to tell it to. There's also a medium with us, the three of us. And then we have also a group on the second Saturday of every month in which people come. It's a small group and they talk about the experiences they have had, somewhere where they won't be judged and they can share these experiences. But it's an organization certainly well worth supporting. And they certainly supported me all the way with both books, and I
It
support them.
sounds like such a powerful group. And I love that you brought up where you can find things on your website, because people, once they realize that, I just read this in a book that I'm reading, and that is like every night when we go to sleep, it's like dying, because our body sleeps and restores, but our soul goes out into the ether and into the astral, and we visit with people and we see things, and that's where deja vu is. And to know that when that death is just like taking an extended nap. I mean, your body loses life, but your soul still goes on the other side, like nothing ever happened, really. I mean, that might be too simplified, but you understand what I'm.
Yeah, exactly. You step out of this body. And of course, there have always been those who wanted to make the effort to live, like the old alchemists, their stories that they found the elixir to live hundreds of years. I don't want to do that. And because you have to invent different identities, I mean, but all the people we love and have worked with, we're not with. So, but there's always been that desire. But I think it's incredibly creative that we can step out of this body, go back to spirit, and then recreate another body. And we often work with those we've been working with before,
Yes.
find each other. So
Yeah.
it's very creative.
It's funny because I always say that, like, people in movies or the theater or restaurants are the extras of our life. You know, the people we have our relationships with, most likely we've had them before, lifetime after lifetime. But then you've had the extras of our life where there's the seat fillers. You know,
Yes,
we fill their seats, they fill our seats, and
yes,
lifetime after lifetime, circumstance after circumstance, we end up crossing
yeah,
paths
yes, it's true. Yes.
in the same comparison. So we have a few minutes left. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd really like to spotlight for the listeners?
Well, I think that we did talk about what I think is most important, and that is that we at least start from the beginning of saying, okay, I'm going to just accept it as a possibility and look into it. I am divine. This is what our ancestors wanted us to remember. They did everything they could to save this message, whether it was in architecture or music or dance or myths or fairy tales, whatever, is that we are all divine, we are all immortal, and we are all creative. And for this, we must maintain our freedom in order to know who we are, to be that. We've had so many pressures in Western culture to suppress that no, we die, we're nothing. And we're discovering, oh, wait a minute, we're discovering their message to us from the past. No, we are divine, immortal, and creative. And we must be aware of that and fulfill that destiny that we have.
I agree. And we do have to. And here's my belief that we're brought onto this earth to work through our lessons so we can get to the white light, you know, the pure light, the pure sooner, easier. We begin to remember earlier. We
Mm,
don't have to be in an amnesic, I don't know if that's the proper
yeah.
word, amnesic state for eternity.
No, it's really true. And I think that, so many people say, well, I don't have dreams, I don't have visions, well, don't worry about it. Just the most important thing is to know that you have everything in you, and that if you seek it, you will step by step find it. I love the description that Karl Kerényi's classicist, also Hungarian, who said in his description of the labyrinth, is that it's a life journey. You go round and round and down until you come to the center where you confront the divine mind, the Christ consciousness, the all, not as other, but as self.
That's powerful.
Isn't that beautiful? That's the journey.
It's
We
beautiful.
are.
It's powerful.
Mhm.
And here's to more people remembering, right? To them learning how to remember. Because it is a learn. I mean, look, we're brought in here, we're given amnesia for a reason. So
Mhm.
that we're not like sitting on our laurels or resenting what we had, in the last lifetime or two lifetimes ago. We do things afresh. It's brand
Mhm.
new. Like every time we wake up, every morning is technically a white plain canvas
It is.
that you can make your own.
And probably the technique of all techniques of awakening is to love. When we think how the human being is capable of learning, of loving a child, of loving a partner, of loving a friend, this is spiritual. The more we love, the more we awaken to the meaning of it all.
So true. And it is all about the love.
Mhm.
And I think on that we have to end because our time is up. Betty, this has been such an amazing conversation and so enlightening and so powerful for so many. I want to thank you so much for being on the show and for talking about your book, Merchants of Light, the consciousness that is changing the world, as well as the miracle of death. There's nothing but life. And again, all of your links and to your social media will be on your blog so you can find it, everyone. It will be there easy for you to just click on that link and get to Betty. So thank you so much for sharing all you've shared today. It was
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you, Marla. I love talking with you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Me too. And I want to thank Bridget, right arm, left arm. God only knows. I say this all the time. What would I do without you? I'm so grateful for you. And for you, the listening audience, I'm so grateful that you've taken time out of your day, out of your life to be a part of the show because I do this show with love and desire in my heart to help you in your life, to bring you amazing people like Betty, amazing information like what Betty has shared today, to help you to decide through your intuition, through your internal knowing, what person, what modality is good for you, is right for you, and will help you. So
Mhm.
thank you for being a part of the show. And as I leave you by sending you love, blessings, and gratitude. Know how grateful I am that you're in my life in whatever capacity you are. For not only are you my student, you are my teacher. Not only am I a teacher of yours, I am your student. And we both learn from each other and we learn for each other. So thank you. And if you haven't heard these words today, I'm going to say them. Yes, I am. I'm going to say them to you. I love you. You
Mhm.
are loved. You are loved not just by me, not just by your loved ones, but there are thousands, if not millions, of beings on the other side of the veil who love you and who are there for you. And I want to conspire for you. So remember to ask them for what you want, for your support, guidance, whatever it is, and speak it out so that they can get the frequency even stronger.
Okay.
So let them start to conspire to work with you on your behalf. So Stay well. I will see you next week. And know you are definitely loved. Bye for now.